So I wanted to ask you, in all your films, which are quite a show and a spectacle and entertaining, but also a comment on the contemporary Korean society and capitalist society. And I think this one follows the trend. And I was wondering if you could discuss a little bit, who do you really see as a parasite in the film? And is that a reflection of what you think of modern society?
뭐 여기 앉아 계신 분들 이 가난한 가족이 기생충이다라고 말해도 틀리진 않겠지만 뭐 너무 쉬운 대답일 것 같고요. 부자 식구들도 마찬가지 아닐까 뭐라는 생각은 있어요.
So you can say that the poor family all sitting here, that they're the parasites, and that wouldn't be wrong. But I think that's a very easy answer. I think the rich family can also be called parasites.
노동의 측면에서는 뭐 그 사람들 운전도 자기가 못하고 뭐 하우스키핑도 누구를 시켜야 되고 다른 사람의 노동을 또 이렇게 빨아들여야 살 수 있는 사람들이니까 그렇게 보면 또 마찬가지 패러사이트인 것 같고요.
So in terms of labor, they can't even drive themselves. They need to hire a housekeeper. So they leech off of the labor that others provide. So in that sense, you can say they're parasites too.
근데 뭐 아니 뭘 또 그 서로에 대한 예의, 인간에 대한 예의가 지켜진다면 뭐 지금 이렇게 일을 하더라도 기생이 아니라 보기 좋은 공생, 같이 사는 게 될 수 있는데. 그게 한 끗 차이인 것 같아요. 그 경계선이 무너지냐 마냐에 따라서 최소한의 예의라고 해야 될까?
So as long as we are able to keep the minimal amount of respect for each other, we can still work and not be parasites, but coexist together. I think there's a fine line between being parasites and just coexisting.
그리고 기본적으로 이 가족들이 뭐 멍청하거나 무능력하거나 게으른 사람들이 아니거든요. 다 멀쩡히 보면 일을 하잖아요. 막상 그 부잣집에 들어가면. 그래서 멀쩡하고 사지가 멀쩡하고 분명히 능력 있는 사람들인데 그럼에도 불구하고 일자리가 없다는 거. 그게 영화의 출발점인데 이 가족들 캐릭터의 출발점이고 그거 자체가 시사하는 말해주는 바가 있다고 생각했어요. 요즘에 한국뿐 아니라 전 세계 모든 이 양극화 시대에 대해서 그 일자리가 없는 그 모습 자체가.
And basically, everyone in the Kim family, it's not as if they're dumb or incompetent or lazy. They're actually very capable and smart. And once they get the jobs in the rich family, they do a really great job. But nonetheless, they don't have jobs. And that's where the story begins. And that's how these characters begin their stories. And I think that in itself sort of reflects this era of polarization that we're living in, this state that applies to not only Korea, but to countries all over the world.
Okay, welcome to Movie Night Extravaganza. I'm your host, Forrest Miller, and I'm here with, as always, my co-host, Jay Underworld.
Hello.
And of course, how's it going?
Good. I'm doing a double feature tonight, so I'm like all pepped and ready to go.
Yeah, I did like a 12-mile bike ride right before I came on here. So like I got like the nice adrenaline rush.
Yeah, well, we learned in Legally Blonde, exercise creates endorphins, and endorphins makes happy people, and happy people don't kill people.
Yeah, and that's why in Parasite, they should have just exercised more, and everything would have been fine.
Exactly.
All right, so introducing our guest lineup, Karthik, who does revolutionary tracks on Left Flank Vets, and of course Alien Encounters on Substack. We have Kenzo Shibata from the Kenzo Shibata Show and Meet the Left on Sundays. The only really leftist podcast like fun panel show that I can think of, kind of in that mold.
And I'm joining Revolutionary Radio too.
Nice. And of course, we have C. Derek Varn, who is the host of Varn Vlog and the official Doug Lane Wrangler, which is becoming a harder job as I see him thirst post across across Facebook. So all right, tonight's movie obviously is Parasite, and you're muted. All right. Tonight's movie obviously is Parasite. Our second Bong Joon-ho entry after doing Snowpiercer a couple weeks ago, which I think was a very fun and productive stream. We really got into depth with that one. Parasite, I think, on an even I think we have a lot to say about this movie in general, but I think because it's a genre film, like, you know, a horror film, I think it's a very interesting, like a metaphorical piece. And of course, you know, the most vapid question is what I wanted to start with, which is why I started with the who are the parasites question, which doesn't really begin to get into, you know, any of the class dynamics in the sense of, like, you know, the wider thing that Bong Joon-ho is obviously trying to say is kind of just like so who's the parasite? So I thought that was an interesting place to start this conversation. If anyone has any thoughts on that.
Obviously, the parasite is us for watching the movie.
On someone else's Hulu account.
I'll watch on mine. I got a Hulu account.
Well, the Parasite is Bong Joon-ho for taking 2 Oscars away from the Joker, right? I know we're gonna dig into that later, but I wanted to start with that little meme.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of insane that, you know, in that year there are 2 movies that are really kind of going pretty hard at neoliberalism. Like, of course, you know, I think Parasite is very much like a class-based movie, and I mean in some ways Joker is too, coming at it from 2 very different genres, but I think, you know, the incisiveness that the Joker brings to, like, criticizing neoliberalism and, like, the slow privatization, I guess, of every really facet of public resources, because, you know, it feels like the fact that, you know, his mental health clinic is not only undersourced and underfunded the entire movie, it, like, closes down halfway through it, which leads to, the spiral into, like, oblivion, which is, you know, in itself kind of a incredibly harsh critique of, you know, neoliberal capitalism. And in a very different way, I think Parasite is a very class conscious reading of that kind of discourse. Varn, you look exhausted. You're still muted somehow. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
There you are.
Now we can hear you.
Hey,
We had about 5 settings we got to get through. I was actually just thinking about what you were saying about the Joker, and I think the Joker does have things to say about class society, but it's almost by accident because of the films it's actually pastiching. And so some of what it's saying is related to neoliberalism. Some of what it's saying is actually kind of related to late Fordism, and that's because it's pulling from films of the 70s. I think Parasite, you know, when you asked me who the Parasite is, I was going to give a serious answer. And it's class aspirationalism. But I found watching this movie with people who know me know that I spent a long time in Korea, and I found watching this movie actually quite interesting, comparing what is said in Korean versus what is said in the subtitles. Because the subtitles do try to get it's not a bad translation, but if you think the film is class conscious from what you get in English, it's doubly so in Korean.
well, you can even see that with the English, because the version I watched, they put the when they spoke in English, they had like that thick accent, so they kept the subtitles, and even what was being said in English was being translated differently on the subtitles.
Yeah, it was trying to, the subtitles was de-Konglishing it, but also just Korean is a highly context syntactic formal language, and so how you address someone is totally based on their age, class position, sex,
That's the
and
Confucianism.
yeah, it's Confucianism plus capitalism in the case of South Korea. And what if you actually listen to the Korean, there's lots of times where the Kim family is addressed inappropriately by not by the Park family actually, but by people who are just barely above them in their peer set. So that is a constant theme that doesn't come across in the English very well at all. And it was very interesting to see, because this movie, it's about the conflict between the Parks and the Kims, but it's also about, and maybe more so about, the inability of the Kims to show class solidarity, and also people not showing class solidarity to them. And that is something that at key points in the film, it comes up, and it's really important as to what Bong Joon-ho is trying to say. Also, Bong Joon-ho is really cagey when he answers questions about this movie, probably even more so than when he answers questions about Snowpiercer. Part of that has to do with the fact that Bong Joon-ho is kind of a known Marxist, but you can get arrested for being a Marxist in South Korea. Still, the national security law is still in place. So sometimes when he answers these questions, I find him way more cagey and way more this isn't really about this, that, or the other than he means. And
I also think that there's something about playing the Oscars game that probably makes it an incredibly awkward. I think one of the most at least from some kind of either Schadenfreude or whatever you want to call it level, watching everybody in the sitting at the Oscars having to applaud Parasite winning was a really I don't know, I felt passionate about that moment. It's a movie that kind of takes down their class and the obliviousness that that kind of entitled rich the kind of thing that I don't think that necessarily the Park family is in the range of celebrity to the point of what somebody like Leonardo DiCaprio would be, but that's what they're aspiring to be. And you can see it even in the way that the Mr. Park has Mr. Park Takes Central Park, the magazine clipping on his wall in the kitchen when you first walk in, and even the American fixation that the family seems to have, their class aspiration is that they want to basically be Americans.
I think that's wrong. I actually think that's completely wrong.
Okay.
The American class aspiration thing is a misunderstanding of the way English and foreign languages are used in the upper class in Korea. If you were to say that they wanted to be American, you would have very much offended them. The taking of English names is a thing that very wealthy people do in South Korea, but it is actually internal to their own class structure. And I think that's often missed, and I think Americans often think it's about them. No offense, but it's something that, for example, if you will notice, this is a very small class demarcator. Did you notice the difference in eyelid between Miss Park and the daughter, and the Kim daughter?
No.
All right. Almost all Koreans who have the money to do it get the epiglottal fold from their eyes surgically altered. Now, we tend to interpret this as trying to look Western. It actually is not at all. It has something to do with some older Korean beauty standard. At least that's what I was told, and they showed me evidence of prior pictures. But it's super rare in Korea and was considered a demarker of royalty. So when I taught at a fairly elite private community, not community college, language college in South Korea, I taught rich teachers basically, and you would come in. Well, men. I taught men's, although Yonsei University, which is the university Fake's coming from, is actually public and super prestigious. but anyway, you would go in and like all the women who were over 19 who had money, you would see recent scarring right here from the surgery. And it was just like, if you were going into that social class and you didn't have that, you were either making a statement or you were poor. So like, it's small things like that are all over this movie that I don't know that people who haven't spent significant time in Korea or are Korean would not pick up. I mean, I just don't know if they would notice it. The names is obvious, like, and the taking of double like foreign names apparently also is like pre-US imperial, like you often had your Korean name and your Chinese name before that. But
which makes sense from also, I mean, an imperial colonizer point of view, like looking at the relationship between China and Korea. And,
well, I mean,
and just you know,
Korea's been imperialized a lot.
And was actually part of China at one point. Briefly.
And part of Korea still is part of China, actually. So part of Chosun is actually in the Korean Autonomous Prefecture and China now. So all this stuff is like in this movie, which is wild to me, because Snowpiercer is clearly the movie he completely made for Oscars for a foreign audience. He shot it in English. This movie is extremely Korean.
And he touches on that in multiple interviews. And I mean, I also think that he probably does that as a way to, well, you know, this movie is on the Oscar. Like when he's doing these interviews, this movie is kind of on the Oscar trail, which is a certain kind of game that you have to play if you're going to get a movie like this onto the Oscars, onto the Oscars roster, and not just, you know, something like Nomadland that doesn't actually have anything to say about class, but kind of has like this class aesthetic to it. This is not a movie with a class aesthetic. This is a movie that has something very much to say about class that's universal while also being extremely Korean.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So no, you know, I think you're right to pick up on the English names. You're right to pick up on, I mean, even small things like the fact they have a driver and that they say they haven't been on the subway in years. And if you've ever lived in Korea, or even spent since the time there, driving sucks. And it is an indication not only of like, it's an indication of wealth in a lot of ways, because it's not even particularly convenient. Whereas the subway system there is awesome. It's like one of the best in the world. It can get you literally anywhere in the country to anywhere else in the country with a few trains and a bus stop. But you have to mix with other social classes to use it.
Yeah.
Which is what Train to Busan was about. But that's that's a different podcast.
Which is, I definitely want to do that one at one point.
No,
but I don't think it's necessarily just the English thing that I was picking up on. It's there's a little bit of a fetishization, I guess, of American commerce, not American culture in the sense of like they want to be Americans, in the sense of like they're taking on like fake American accents, and you know, but there's like a fetishization of that, of our type of capitalism as like the highest form of capitalism in a weird way. Like the fact that he has the Mr. Park takes Central Park means that his company is at least trading in America somehow. You know what I mean? Like is at least entered the free market system in America. And it seems like that's something, I mean, the fact that he's on a magazine cover, the fact, you know what I mean? Like all of that kind of, I think, and not just, I mean, not just that point, but like, I feel like there's a lot of different moments like that in this where, like at one point, I mean, obviously the American Indian thing where they, you know, where they're dressed up as they have this like fixation on that. But then there's also, at one point when they come home with holding a bunch of, you know, the walkie-talkies and all of that stuff, he comes home with a bunch of different products for, you know, the song, I think's birthday. And he's coming home and he's like, oh, I picked all of these up. Like they shipped all the way from America. So they're the American thing, I don't think is like they want to be Americans. I guess I said that wrong. It's more about like the fetishization of American capitalism and like that
One-
kind of free market.
One little thing that I picked up on was that Jessica supposedly went to Illinois State University, which is my alma mater. And I thought that, I don't know if this was intentional, but Illinois State is like a third-tiered state school. It's fine for many things, but it doesn't have much of an international program. But the University of Illinois Champaign does. And that's where we get a lot of international students. Been like, it's like one of those shady universities where they'll pick international students before local students because they could pay more tuition. But
Which
it's
is
like
most universities now.
Yeah.
Honestly.
But like, the thing with U of I though, Champaign, is that it has a huge international program and it's pretty well respected in most of the schools. So like, I was almost wondering if that was like an intentional flub, like they meant U of I but said Illinois State instead.
There's a couple of intentional flubs. And that character, Jessica, actually is interesting in that of the Kims, she's the most willing to cross boundaries. Another subtle thing is when she first meets Miss Park, she talks about Daesung being potentially crazy as an art and needing art therapy, and Miss Park freaks out. That's a cultural taboo in Korea. I like when I taught in Korea, my students wouldn't teach me how to say crazy in Korean when we would do language exchange because it was offensive to even bring up the idea. I had to apply some Korean businessmen with alcohol to get them to teach me that. So there's interesting stuff like that. But yeah, that's a flub because they don't really, the Kims know enough. The Kims know enough to know that America is super prestigious, but they make mistakes. And then the Parks actually are also kind of faking it in a lot of ways, even though they are legitimately that rich. And so they don't notice the mistakes, which is something that I think is like specifically there and kind of a sly comment on like the way like foreign, education is used in Korea. I mean, because one of the things about Korea is Korean high schools are like usually like the second or third best in the PISA scores in the world. Their colleges kind of actually, except for Yonsei and Seouldae, kind of suck for reasons of that I could go into, but don't really want to because that would take a lot of time. But there is this aspirational culture amongst even the Korean upper middle class to get their kids, even at a young age, to America, even if it means sending them to a public school in a not even necessarily great district. Like, and so it's a big class demarcator. And like, I unfortunately in my last year in Korea, I taught at a private high school that was geared for the lower, like the true middle class, to try to game that up by getting English language education on the quote cheap, but it was still probably about $10,000 a year. To then go into kind of low third tier U.S. universities is what we could get them with big, and maybe second tier with big international programs. But the kids were often sold that they were going to be able to get into like Harvard and Yale. Which there was no way. So you're very right to notice that. That's very much in the film.
When were you in South Korea? Like, was it before? I mean, I guess it probably wasn't, but they have like, so the government in South Korea now I think is a little bit different than it was previously, right? Under
the government right now, you have a left liberal government.
Under President Moon, which is why the movie I think was received well by that administration, better than it would have been. Like you can tell that there's a video that I saw that it's interesting. I didn't think it was necessarily worth playing, but President Moon toasts Bong Joon-ho and toasts the cast of the movie and talks about, number one, like how prestigious it is that Americans are now imbibing in South Korean culture, which makes sense because it's kind of like an internationalist, because he talks about K-pop and he talks about Bong Joon-ho, which of course are things that even if they're even if the point of the movie is kind of criticizing Korean society, are things that I think are probably prestigious in that sense. But then Bong Joon-ho seems kind of almost raptured by having the president next to him, and he doesn't seem cagey in that context. He seems actually, you know, they finally kind of have a president that seems like he's willing to put money into, you know, feel shame enough to put money into the you know, the semi-basement apartments and the housing crisis a little bit, because this movie is now being seen by an international audience. I don't necessarily know that like a right-wing government would care.
It depends on the right-wing government. So I lived there during the end of the Lee Myung-bak administration, which was one kind of conservatism. It's very an American style conservatism. It was a Protestant conservatism. And this is another thing, that there's religious overtones in this movie too, but and then the Park administration, and it's interesting the family's name Park, because the Park administration was the super conservative, more nationalist version of conservatism that was Buddhist, and that replaced it the year I left in 2013, and you know, ended in scandal.
And then President Moon came in the middle of the Trump administration, right? Like,
right.
In the middle of like kind of this crisis moment, which is something I think that gets alluded to in this as well, like the fear of North Korea that, you know, a lot of older Koreans, like South Koreans probably have, like, you know, but then kind of
a lot of Korean films actually have this fear of North Korea. I went through a phase where I was just watching Korean spy films, and there's some real bangers out there. The Suspect is my favorite, but anyways, but there's a lot of Korean films. There's this subtext of like, oh, big bad North Korea.
But this movie, Parasite didn't seem to have. Parasite seemed to be talking about the great Namjoon, I think, is the architect that you know, fictitiously in the movie designs the house. They kind of, when he moves out, they talk about how he was embarrassed that he had the basement, the bunker. You know what I mean? Like, and then they're kind of mocking the North Korean like TV announcer. It kind of felt like this almost changing of the guard, where it's like almost in some cases a little bit like embarrassing to admit how afraid, you know.
So can I like give some more context for this again? I hate to dominate this, but my ties to Korea are actually pretty deep.
Well, I literally have asked Varn about living in South Korea on the outline for this episode. So
yeah, I lived there right after the release of Bong Joon-ho's third film, Gwemul, or the host in English, which is a bad translation. It actually means monster. I don't know why they translated as the host, but
the Parasite,
which actually was a big thing in the States too, if you remember.
Yeah, it was a big movie here, kind of. I remember actually watching it in the U.S. and then watching it again in Korea, and like beginning to understand its Korean context. But one thing I would say is the Korean movie portrayal of fear of North Korea, and the way that most Koreans under the age of 50 feel about North Korea are entirely different. I lived there in Korea during the Yeonpong Island bombings when Kim Jong-il died and Kim Song-on took over. And if there was a chance where there was actual war between the North and the South and the U.S., it was actually that moment. And because there was live fire and people actually died. And we were the Americans were freaking out, and the Americans back in the States were freaking out. And I would talk to my Korean friends, and they'd be like, "What are you worried about? Like, what are you worried about? We've been living like this forever. Seoul's literally put here to get blown up. Like, and they're not gonna do it, or they would have done it 20 years ago. Chill out." And I was like, "Okay." And
similar, similar kind of with Taiwan and China, right? Like in some senses, like the feeling of having these two opposing countries with some kind of firepower, one of them backed by the U.S., living within a very small space of each other. Yeah.
But I would say that if you look through Bong Joon-ho's movies, now he's very careful about this because being sympathetic to the North will land you in prison. And like a left-wing political party that was kind of popular in South Korea was busted up the year after I left because somebody said something that could be taken kind of as being mildly North Korea supportive. Also, when Occupy Yoido, which was their version of Occupy Wall Street, was going on, the moment Kim Jong-un said anything nice about it, it stopped dead. And like morphed into something else, never used Occupy nomenclature again. Like it. So it's that tension's there, but in Bong Joon-ho's movies, the villain is is usually Korea, and then the background villain is probably the U.S. military. Like that, you know, that's definitely true in the Host. That's true in a few other films. So like, it's not something that really shows up. I think he views it as a distraction.
Oh, you can keep going. Sorry, I was just.
Oh yeah. No, that was just what I was saying about, because like it's not just not in this movie. It's not in any of his movies.
Yeah. Well, but this movie seemed like it had something to say specifically about the relationship between, and I think that, you know, because I mean, obviously, like, I don't know a lot about, you know, South Korea, but like I remember President Moon getting elected, and I remember feeling like that was some kind of sea change in a way, because for like the first time, you know, I mean, because it was during the height of Trump and Kim Jong-un's like back in like Fire and Fury thing, which made it seem like it was terrifying that, you know, North Korea could have stuff pointed at us, which obviously they don't have the capacity to do that. They would just, if they really wanted to, would aim things at South
Japan, Korea or South Korea.
Yeah, like, you know what I mean? So it doesn't seem like that's, but it was in this moment of maximum tension that, you know, the Korean, like the South Korean people spoke, and all of a sudden they had one candidate that was like, I want to stick by the US, and they had another candidate that was like, no, I want to, like, pretty much at some point we should probably reunify Korea to some level, like, which was President Moon. And I don't think that he still obviously has played the same game that like someone like AMLO or someone has to, where it's like, you know, while, you know, rhetorically making overtures to a more left-wing program, obviously has to stick by the U.S. in ways that, you know, a truly left-wing country wouldn't.
Well, he's also suppressing his own leftist. I mean, like, yeah, I do want to point that out. Like there are actual leftists in South Korea that are, I mean, he's not
a leftist, right?
No, he's not. I mean, he has, okay, so his legacy is a little complicated, particularly in light of Park, because Park is the daughter of the U.S.-backed dictator in the late 70s, early 80s. And that dictator was really weirdly fascinating. Like, that Park attempted like planned capitalism, this kind of third position, third wayist, backed by the U.S. military, so violently eradicated a lot of the left in Korea.
And that was the protest movement that came up kind of around that, was what Bong Joon-ho originated in, right? Like, because we were watching the Snowpiercer clips, and he was talking about how pretty much every day, you know, they were the students were protesting the dictatorship.
Right. Yes, and the dictatorship didn't end until like 1985. So like, so Bong Joon-ho comes out of that. Moon comes out of that. I think Moon was actually imprisoned by Park's father, I believe. I may be getting Moon confused with his other predecessor in the liberal opposition, but I don't think so. So at one point Moon was a leftist, but his position is complicated, as is his position on reunification with the North. Because the other thing I will say is, nobody who's younger really believes in reunification with the North, and a lot of people who push it in South Korea are actually right-wingers and see North Korea as a source of cheap labor. It's kind of gross.
And his kind of how it's used.
Right.
If you've ever read the graphic novel Playing Young, I believe is what it's called. It's about an animator who goes over to North Korea to supervise an animation project, and just kind of his experiences there. And it's absolutely worth, you know, picking up and reading, just because of, like, you know, it's it's what he saw, but like it says something. It says a lot more about North Korea than we normally get, and you know, in media. So you know, I was very thankful for reading that.
So
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh no, I just the point I guess I was trying to make was that there was this moment of maximum tension. I don't think that what the people in Korea that elected Moon were trying to say was we should reunify with North Korea, as in we should become one country. But it so when I remember watching that election and feeling like it went from kind of a super a government that was super antagonistic to North Korea right before that to kind of a more conciliatory in the sense of being like, hey, maybe we should de-escalate this tension, which was President Moon, which obviously he's not truly trying to reunify the two Koreas, but it did seem like it seemed like, you know, the South Korean people kind of were asked, I mean, pretty much in this election, like, do you want this maximum tension with North Korea and the US, or do you want a more conciliatory approach to things? And it seems like it was kind of a referendum on the Trump Kim Jong-un feud more than it was a referendum on reunification as an idea.
Yeah, I would I actually would just say I don't really know. I would have to actually go back to Korea and talk to people. That feels true enough to me, but I'm also sometimes wary about our understanding of these countries.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's Western media that I was getting, that
right.
I was paying attention to at this time.
Because sometimes we put emphasis on the American situation in ways that I actually think, not that it isn't a factor, it absolutely is. But that we overemphasize the American importance in what's going on.
Everywhere. We do that in every single country. We're like, hey, you know what? This election that might have been about, you know, social issues and like national issues that have nothing to do with us. Like, you know what? The fact that this government's a little more liberal, that says something about us, and I think we need to do something about it.
Right. I mean, because the Park administration before the Moon administration was a godforsaken train wreck. Like things got really bad in South Korea for a while, as far as relative to South Korea. Not just, and it wasn't even stuff like having to do with the North, although that was very much there. But also like there was like major, like there was a capitalist based like boat wreck that killed a ton of children, and there was all kinds of corruption scandals, and like people were committing suicide over it. It was not it kind of was like I hate to use the analogy, but it kind of was like their own Trump administration, except it began before the Trump administration, and felt like it was part of this general right-wing turn in a lot of the, you know, the sphere of Western influence, because you also saw a right-wing turn in Japan a little bit before that, and then you saw it in Europe too. But it was just, it didn't work. To get back to the movie a little bit, I do think that this is deliberately commenting on that in very subtle ways. I also think there's some interesting things being said about like maybe where wealth and stuff may be pivoting in South Korea. Like the end where it's a German family that buys that's an interesting, weird thing. I mean, like, foreign families buying property is strange. Go ahead.
I rewatched the ending today, and that stuck out to me too. And kind of the fact that they kind of snuck the property onto them, being like, hey, the German family wouldn't have had any idea that like a murder had, you know, multiple murders had taken place on this property. So like we kind of like foisted this property, like, and they had that on TV, like, you know, because the German family wouldn't have. I'm pretty sure the TV announcer said it because the German family wouldn't have spoken Korean in order to understand what was being said on TV too, which is hilarious. So this kind of touches on what you were saying though in the beginning about Bong Joon-ho being a little cagey about this clip about you know the overtly Marxist messaging or class conscious messaging. I have a clip of him. This kind of is the next level, I think, to the original "Who are the parasites?" question, which is kind of the most vapid like baseline, like, because who the fuck really cares? There's like Parasite metaphors throughout the entire movie. I think some of the Parasite metaphors are kind of brilliant and multi-layered, because the purpose of the Kim family's infiltration is, it's almost like you're watching evolution right in front of you, which kind of is a parasitic, like what parasites basically do is information gathering more than anything, in order to replicate the system function of a whole organism. So I think it is interesting that throughout the movie they're kind of always taking in information and learning from it. Like by the end of the movie, who knows if their Illinois State comment would have been made, or if they would have had a better understanding of that. So it seems like throughout the movie you're kind of watching them evolve in real time. And this is Bong Joon-ho talking about whether he's a neutral author in this movie in terms of class relations. So I thought this was the next step to our original.
This is a film about, people have talked a lot about the political aspect of the film as a film about the haves and the have-nots. And, you've certainly been, of late, been moving in pretty elite circles. So I'm just curious how the politics of the film are talked about in that world.
뭐 여러 가지 질문을 받기도 했어요. 이게 뭐 급진적인 질문을 받기도 하고, 아니면 그냥 완전히 장르 영화의 관점에서 영화적인 익사이트먼트에 대한 질문도 받기도 하고, 뭐 극과 극이 있는데. 예.
So I have received a lot of questions. Some of them have been pretty political and radical, and some just tended to focus on the genre aspects of this film, asking about the cinematic excitement that this film brings.
영화가 그 두 가지 면을 다 갖고 있어서 뭐 어떻게 보면 당연한 상황인 것 같기도 하고요.
So in a way, I think it's natural because the film has both extremes.
뭐 특히 뭐 이 영화를 통해서 한국의 어떤 뭐 사회적인 혁명이 어떤 도화선이 되는 그런 영화인 거냐라는 질문까지 받은 적도 있는데, 뭐 그런 것까지는 생각은 못했었고요. 예.
I also once received a question on whether this film will instigate a revolution in Korea, but honestly, I didn't really think about that.
그냥 우리도 뭐 여러분이나 저나 다 지금 이 시대를 살면서, 자본주의 시대를 살면서 자본주의의 달콤함도 있고 또 자본주의의 씁쓸하고 고통스러운 점도 있고, 그 두 가지를 다 겪는다고 봐요. 그래서 그런 우리 모두가 같이 겪고 있는 그런 어떤 혼란스러움에 대한 얘기다라는 게 저의 기본적인 생각이었는데. 예.
I think for me, it's about, the era of capitalism that we all live in right now, the sweetness, the bitterness, and the pain of capitalism. And I thought that this film expresses the chaos that we're all experiencing together. That was my basic thought for this film.
So do you see the film as more of like a, sort of neutral analysis of the system, the society that we live in, or do you, because, there's been a recurring theme in your films of really being on the side of, or at least very empathetic of the underdog figure.
그 뉴트럴하다라는 이제 단어에 대해서 제가 이제 뭐 모르겠어요. 그 부분을 뭐 제대로 고민을 해봤는지 모르겠는데, 이제 제 이제 영화에 나오는 캐릭터들, 특히 이제 가난한 가족에 대해서 제가 뭐 어떤 냉정한 거리감을 갖고 있진 않아요. 그건 사실인데. 예.
So I'm not really sure, because I don't know if I've put in a lot of thought into that word neutral, but I don't think in my film, with my characters and particularly with the rich family, I don't think I maintain a cold sense of distance from them.
또 이제 주인공 가난한 가족들이 뭐 물론 나쁜 짓을 했죠. 벌을 받아야 마땅할 나쁜 짓을 한 건 또 사실인데, 또 그들이 그러고 싶어 그랬나 하면 꼭 그런 것 같지는 않고, 어쨌든 최소한의 어떤 동정심이랄까, 저 자신이 정서적 감정적으로 그 가난한 가족에 이렇게 연결돼 있는 지점은 분명히 있어요. 그래서 뉴트럴이라고 얘기하기는 쉽진 않을 것 같아요.
And with the poor family, the main characters of this film, it's true that they did do bad things, and in a way they do deserve punishment for what they've done, but they didn't do any of that because they wanted to. And I think throughout the film, I have that sort of that sense of empathy and pity for these characters, and there are definitely points where I'm emotionally connected to them. So I don't think you can quite call that neutral.
So yeah, I mean, he's still like very careful about the wording to answering these questions for sure. But I think that's kind of the next level of questioning on this subject, because it starts out, you know, who are the parasites, which isn't really a question that matters. You know what I mean? Like the like, as you said, like the class aspiration element is the parasite. Like, you know, and you can answer that question a whole bunch of different ways, but I think it is important to ask the question: is Bong Joon-ho neutral in this film? And obviously, he is not. He's definitely, like, he's breaking down the system and like the class system in a certain way, but there's definitely no neutrality to it. I do really like the fact that he doesn't feel malicious to the Park family, because I don't think that that's necessarily a helpful. When you're talking about a system like capitalism as a system, I don't think it's helpful necessarily to just be like, hey, you know, the people in this class are purposely being malicious towards the people in other classes. I think that if you watched Mr. Park at work, you probably would come away with the idea that he was incredibly exploitative. I'm just going to guess, you know, because he's running like some kind of, it seems like some kind of either tech company or something like that, you know, when he goes and visits him at work. But, you know, I think that it's more than
Another Brick. It's called Another Brick. The company is called Another Brick. Like the Pink Floyd song.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I like to shout out to the song through that. And although like they kept showing the shot of the mug from which he drinks coffee, and it keeps showing. I think there's a shot of him behind like a glass screen with the logo of the company saying Another Brick, which is kind of interesting portrayal, because like, you know, it sees the veneer of like technological like kind of innovation as a sort of smoke screen. Like it's not really like amounting to any kind of like material like difference. It's not making any real difference. It's just another brick in the wall.
Yeah. And another interesting point in the movie, I think, is that, you know, it seems like the characters kind of mirror their like the parents in a way, like the younger characters. So when Dahai is talking about she's like, oh well, you know, he's talking about her little brother, and she's like, you know, he's not really this artistic genius or this creative genius, he's kind of faking it. It feels like that's kind of a commentary, I think, on the father too. The fact that, you know, he's running this company and he's kind of like in an almost Elon Musk kind of way, like faking his way through, seeming like some kind of aloof creative genius. And then you see him throughout the movie and he's kind of dull. Like he's not a particularly interesting person. He doesn't really make emotional connections to anybody. And, you know, it's interesting that, you know, the way that Bong Joon-ho kind of treats these characters is not maliciously. Like it's not like he's making like this commentary where, oh well, the rich people are like particularly evil. The rich people are actually fairly nice, but they're like also oblivious to everything around them. They have no real social skills. They have no way to do anything. They're like kind of useless. And it kind of, you know, so they're not necessarily the ones perpetuating the system. I mean, they are in this class dynamic, but they're not the ones in control of the system. They're kind of,
yeah, that's why like the whole, you're like you were saying, Forrest, the whole question of who is the parasite is kind of a boring question, because it's like everyone has this parasitic relationship with the next, you know, rung up or the next rung down. Like the Park family, they definitely, you know, there are people that above them would consider them leeches. You know, people who, you know, hold office. You know, people who
just look at probably the corporate
ladder,
board.
Yeah.
Like, because, you know, for sure this guy is going like in a kind of, I mean, I want to compare it to like the technological aspect to like maybe like Elon Musk, like not that rich, but like, you know what I mean, like somebody like that's kind of creating these products under some kind of umbrella. He's going somewhere for funding. You know that he's like kind of a cloying like parasite in those circles, trying to get money for a company while also, you know, the people working in his house are obviously have a parasitic relationship to him, and down and down and down it goes.
Well, it's like Walt Disney too. Like Ub Iwerks was the genius behind the Disney Corporation. He's the you know, was the lead animator and did all the work that Disney got credit for. And yet, you know, do we remember Ub Iwerks? You know, I do. I'm a nerd like that, but you know, I don't know how y'all roll.
Well, I think the Beatles comparison is also interesting in that the movie strongly implies that this family is relatively new money.
Mhm.
The ostentatious house. I mean, that house, by the way, in South Korea. Oh my god. It seems rich to us, but like having lived in South Korea and like what I know what a 2-bedroom apartment actually cost in Seoul, I was like, holy crap, you have a yard. I have never seen a yard in South Korea, and in the middle of Seoul. Oh my god.
Yeah. And I have a clip. The next one that I'm going to play is about the process of designing that house. And Bong Joon-ho actually was the one that created the blueprint for that house, which is a very interesting fact because he's obviously not an architect. So there's kind of a funny moment in that. But yeah, no, I mean, sorry, continue. I just wanted to.
No, I mean, so the way housing works in South Korea is this thing called key money. Almost nobody owns a house, even if you're rich. But key money is this thing. It also exists in Japan, but those are the only places I know that use it, where you put down massive deposits on an apartment and that lowers your rent. But when I say massive, I mean like a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Seoul, if it requires key money, could have a minimum key money deposit of the equivalent of 80K. And like, usually they're more like 200,000 to 300,000 USD, and that's been skyrocketing in the last decade too. And I'm talking in prices that are 10 years old. So like, that's why those like basement apartments exist and stuff, because the size of the Kim's apartment actually isn't that abnormal even for a middle class person. It's where it's at. It's the fact that it's in the basement. Because if you've ever been in Seoul in the summer, it floods constantly.
And it was funny. It was funny rewatching this as it kind of happened in New York City. And because I was in New York City for the weekend and in the Bronx, and like, I mean, I was at an Airbnb, so it wasn't like I was anywhere near anything that flooded, but like I watched a lot of people that I know in the city because I live like an hour and a half from New York City.
I guess you're taking my dating advice.
No, so I live an hour and a half from the city, so I have a lot of friends that are there or that have moved there, or I was born there, so like it's interesting like watching the subways fully flood and watching like even the dumb like videos of people trying to jump in the water, which why the fuck would you ever do that? But yeah, it's crazy seeing that happen in a place that I mean, New York City floods, but not to the level that it did this weekend.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot more of that worldwide. But I mean, in Korea, like Seoul is in a basin between a bunch of mountains. Like we need to remember that. And like Korea has a monsoon season, and so the city. The surrounding area, it's also surrounded by a bunch of rivers, which all overflow all the time. The Han, the Osan. I mean, in my first year in Korea, I was stuck on the 12th floor of an apartment because the entire first floor of the apartment building, which they didn't put an apartment on, so apparently they knew, had flooded out, and we didn't have power. And like, so you'd walk, and that was like for a week and a half. And if I had to go to work, I kind of swam. To the bus stop. I mean, not literally swam, but pretty close. And if you were in a basement apartment, your apartment would have been entirely underwater. Like, so the flooding out thing that happens in there, I have lived through that happening really bad in Seoul once, and that's the same thing I'm describing. But I'm pretty sure it happens every few years where everybody in those low bottom apartments just get flooded out and they have to go to like one of the city centers and hang out for a few days, and they probably lost all their stuff because it's all waterlogged. And the thing about this is you have to remember Korea is not a poor country at all. Like in some ways, technologically and whatnot, Korea is ahead of the United States. So it's but if you're poor there, it's one thing. Another thing is the smell stuff that comes up all the time. Some of that's related to that. But like, if you're a poor person in Korea and you're at the ground level, you constantly kind of smell of trash because that's just how you dispose of your food garbage. You leave it out and on the side of the street, and the streets in South Korea kind of stink. And I don't say that disparagingly. It's just the way they do trash pickup. They do pick it up. But again, so the lower down in the apartments you are, the more likely you are to smell, and that comes up over and over again.
Have you ever smelled New York City after it rains?
Yeah, gross.
Yeah,
it's gross.
No, it's
not. And I also imagine like it probably smells a bit like during a garbage strike, because I was in Toronto once during a garbage strike. It was not good, folks.
All right, so going on this topic, I guess. I found this very interesting that the house plays obviously a really big role in it, and I have one clip with Bong Joon-ho and other people talking about the house as a character, the set designer talking about the rich house as a character, and then
I mean both houses are a character, really.
Yeah, no. So after
they're both parasites
too. After watching that, and we could talk about it, and then I have a clip of the semi basement. Like the Korean news kind of explaining the semi basement situation and trying to kind of gloss over it, and then Bong Joon-ho talking about the semi So I thought those were two interesting clips to play back to back, and then we can get into like the more fun stuff with the meme ranking and Trump and talking about the Parasite win. But I thought this was important to play briefly here.
Pre-existing house, but it's one that you built. If it I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me that a lot of the anxiety, the class anxiety, is actually built into the structure of the house, with the upstairs and the wide spaces and the sunlight and the downstairs. How much of that is coming from the script and from Bong, and how much of that is your idea?
우선 봉 감독님께서 시나리오를 주고 나서 그러고 나서 이제 저희랑 얘기를 할 때 그 부잣집에는 본인이 필요한 배우들의 동선이 분명히 있다.
When director Bong first gave me the scenario and he was talking to us about the house, he made it clear that there was a certain line and a path that he wants the actors to follow in the rich house.
그러고 나서 봉 감독님께서 시나리오를 쓰시면서 기본적으로 본인 머릿속에 있는 평면도를 저한테 보여주셨어요.
So director Bong, when he handed me the scenario, he also provided me with a floor plan that he was imagining.
그래서 기본적으로 그거를 토대로 해서 제가 봉 감독님과 계속 얘기를 하면서 디자인을 했고, 그러고 나서 제 친구이자 건축가인 친구한테 자문을 구했어요.
So that became the basis of our design for the set. And I fortunately had a friend who is an architect, so I was in consultation with him throughout after that in designing the set.
하지만 돌아온 대답은 이거는 건축가가 지은 집이 아니다. 이거는 왜냐하면 그 안에는 분명히 사람이 살 수 있을 만한 어떤 것들이 분명히 존재를 해야 하는데 이것은 그런 집이 아니다라고 얘기를 했어요.
But actually, when I first showed my architect friend the design that director Bong came up with, he actually said that this is not a livable house. He said this is not a living space.
Directors.
그래서 그런 것들을 스스로가 이겨내고 그런 것들을 어찌됐든 저희 입장에서는 프로덕션 디자이너는 화면에 보이는 것들이 가장 중요한 요소이기 때문에 그런 것들을 봉 감독님과 계속 대화를 하면서 만들어 나갔습니다.
But I still had to manage to bring this onto the screen because, as you know, of course, as the production designer, what's most important for me is what is being shown on the screen. So there was a lot of navigating to do there.
그래서 그 친구한테 그 스토리를 이렇게 막 설명했던 기억이 나요. 이런 가난한 사람들이 부잣집으로 하나씩 침투해 들어가는 얘기 웃기지 않니? 이러고.
In a funny way, Snowpiercer is a horizontal idea, and this is a vertical
It's
idea.
houses. So
As though the lower depths are at the bottom and the rich people are at the top, and you carry that through from the start to the finish in this extraordinary structure that you created.
On surface, it looks quite simple. So the rich house on the top of the hill, and the poor family, the main character, they live in semi-basement kind of. 영화로 깊게 들어가면 그게 점점 더 세분화돼 있어요. 그래서 그 여러 더 많은 레이어들을 볼 수 있고, 이 집의 구조가 결국 영화 내러티브 스토리텔링과 아주 직접적으로 연관돼 있죠. 그래서 집에 대해서 더 설명하면은 그것 자체가 스포일링이 될 것 같아서 꺼려지고 있네요.
So yeah, I thought that part of it was really interesting, like how much he really thought about the house as an actual character in the film itself, and like, you know, building the narrative, like the narrative around the house as the central structure.
I wanted to throw out a sort of one-liner almost that I like, kind of first thing that occurred to me when I was like rewatching the movie, which is that it felt like the class struggle came to the Bates Motel, because like the Bates Motel or Bates Hotel, I forget if it's the motel or the hotel.
Bates Motel.
Motel, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like, it's supposed to be, and Zizek does this analysis where it's supposed to be the representation of the id-ego and the superego, and it kind of like easily maps onto the analysis that Bong Joon-ho brings to the table as well. And it's interesting that he superimposes that on the class struggle, because there is an element of like the petit bourgeoisie kind of like playing to the whole, you know, you have to be civil and polite and like sly and like be the con artist. There's a very cool Dina Hashem bit, like shout out to her, comedian from New York City. Yeah, and like she has this beautiful bit in which she says like Republicans like themselves, conservatives like themselves a con man, and liberals like themselves a con artist. Like they want the person to like butter them up first or something like that. And it's kind of that way that you know, I forget the names of them. I'm really sorry about the fact that I don't know which family is which. I believe the rich family is the Park family.
Yeah, the rich family is the Park family.
The Park family, and the poor family is the Kim family. And I didn't even like register what the third family is.
Which tells us a lot about the fact.
Yeah.
Right. Which tells us a lot about the fact that, like, you know, what position that they actually have in the whole like socio-economic hierarchy. Wow. Where they
that's the Charlie Day thing from It's Always Sunny, where he has the board behind him.
more or less.
Sylvia.
Well, that way I don't get, you know, Bong Joon-ho confused with Kang Ho Song, who I love Kang Ho Song.
When I was preparing for doing the JFK on This Is Revolution, I like took my ADHD medication, and I had gotten up at like 3 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep. So I watched JFK for the first time, and it was like 6 a.m. when I finished, and I was taking notes, and I felt like that fucking that Pepe Sylvia meme, because I was like, all right, now I understand everything that Oliver Stone's trying to say.
One of the things that came up in Parasite, I zeroed in on Da Song a lot. Because it made me think of the education system. I don't know Korea as well as Japan, but you know, I know in Japanese culture, like you don't talk about mental illness. Like if you have a mentally ill, if you're mentally ill to the point where you can't really function, you're just gonna live with your family, and they're gonna like keep you a secret pretty much.
Yep, same in Korea.
And I was thinking with Da Song, like he was obviously someone who had some special needs, but they were convinced that he was gifted. And that's also, you know, a big part of the U.S. system where, like, if you have money, you're gifted. And if you are weird and you don't have money, you're lumped into special education. And you have kids that are in SPED classes that are brilliant. that could be, you know, doing amazing things, but then they're kind of lumped in with, you know, other people who don't have the money to test into gifted.
I mean, I kind of had the weird opposite thought about that, which is that the song, I think if he was an American kid, would have just been pumped like through with Ritalin, because
Well,
you know
yeah.
the kind of what it seemed like he had was some form of like attention deficit. I don't know whether it would have been. I mean, he might have been like neurodivergent in like, you know, I mean, like in a, but it seems like what he had most of all was like an attention deficit problem, which is, you know, I think is a neoliberal capitalism problem. Like, you know what I mean? Like we've been kind of so pumped full of like, you know, everything from brands to like logo, like, you know what I mean? Like, how can anybody focus on things? But it seems like the hyperactivity was what they wanted to really control with him. It didn't seem like he didn't seem like a kid that had like severe mental issues. It seemed like he had something more along the lines of ADHD in my reading of it.
But I mean, autism and ADHD are on the same you know, are deeply connected. Like there's a lot of overlap. So, you know, you can read it as like high functioning autism or ADHD if you wanted to.
Yeah. I think to be completely frank, I do not think that would have crossed Bong Joon-ho's mind. I do think the mental illness would have, but not any of the way we're framing it.
I just think it's funny. The American way of dealing with it would have been to pump him full of ADHD drugs and like, you know what I mean, like pacify him.
Well, Korean education is really interesting in that in the younger ages, like if you were to go, if you're used to an American education system, going to Korean kindergarten, you think there's no discipline whatsoever because kids are like running around like crazy. Also, little kids are everywhere in Korea. Like, even though it's not, there's not like it's not a high birth country, but like you go into the bar at midnight, there's going to be kids screaming. Like, but middle school is incredibly brutal. So like, and they
just like America then.
No.
If it's anything like Japan, then no.
Probably for different reasons.
Middle school is incredibly brutal in the sense that like, that's when you tend to enter into the tutoring or the Hagwon system, cram schools. That's when you tend to, so for example, I used to teach teachers, so I went into a middle school in South Korea after they made corporal punishment illegal. All right.
That'd be a shit show.
I'm stating that for a reason, okay? And I went into this semi-rural middle school as a foreign observer, and a kid had slightly too long hair. The gym coach called him in front of the entire lunchroom, punched him in the stomach, and knocked him down.
Wow.
For a dress code violation. Another time that we witnessed was in a sixth grade thing, and all this is blatantly illegal under Korean law. Like, this is not okay in Korea. I just want to like, this is like the, but it's so culturally accepted that like elementary school you're allowed to be crazy, and then middle school slam hard. Another example of that was a gym class. And
wait,
somebody was skipping.
Do you know how old the song was supposed to be in this? I don't. Was he supposed to be like 8 or 9?
He's supposed to be 8 or 9. He's like right in that about to enter that transition period. That's how I read it.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that before.
So some of his behavior, I don't think would have been considered out of like just even that odd in South Korea. What would have been considered odd is how imperious he is with his parents. That would be kind of unheard of. Like, you just don't do that.
But it also seems like the parents weren't disciplined.
They're not bothered by it.
Yeah,
they're not.
Which seems like
that's the Confucianism that I brought up before we started filming. Because that's a large part of that region of Asia's culture. It has to do, a lot with class, but also like how how everybody deals with each other and how they understand. So like when you meet somebody, you want to know who's the elder person so they could show the other people respect. And so they would try to find out how old you are and where you fit on their like what your job is and how you fit into the different categories. So it's very class based in a very different way. Europeans don't have the divvied up age thing like Koreans do, but like Confucius said something like the leader is the leader, the father is the father, the son is the son, which basically means that everybody has their place, and you must respect the people who are within the place. And is kind of, and I hope I'm not screwing this up too much because I'm no expert on Confucius, but I've done enough to make myself look like I know what I'm talking about.
I would say that one thing I would say is like if you overgeneralize about Confucianism in East Asia, you can get in trouble. But you're actually right in terms of Korea. Korea is probably Confucian social norms are probably more instantiated there because it's part of the founding of the Choson dynasty than anywhere else in East Asia. Like definitely more than Japan, definitely more than China, where Confucian is actually from.
Yeah, and it was like pushed heavily by the state too.
It was for a long time.
Which is actually why I know so much about it, is because I've studied Chinese art history. So
right,
I got a good foundation.
So the one thing I would say is that the way that like we're reading this as ADHD, and there is some talk of schizophrenia, which that Jessica
but that seems to be more of played for laughs.
It's her actually playing Miss Kim, but it's also showing that they can get away, that they too can get away with massive social, that this family's rich enough that they don't feel the social pressure in the same way, because Jessica crosses a major line by bringing that up. Like that is a bigger deal than like when she freaks out. Yeah. Like you would think that Jessica just sabotaged. If you're Korean, you think that Jessica just sabotaged the job interview. Like she might have sabotaged Kiwoo's, Kevin's, like future too. Like, but
you also kind of think that in universalist terms, when Kevin grabs the when he grabs the daughter's hand like that, I think in front of the mother, in kind of like an almost like romantic sense, like, you know what I mean? I feel like there's a moment there where just universally, like,
that's also a social violation, but not. It actually wouldn't be as big as one as saying that the son is crazy.
I'm sure not. But
you're supposed to be seen as the elder of there, like you're supposed to take care of it. So if it was maybe it could be argued that he wasn't grabbing her hand in a romantic way like we saw it, but as a fatherly kind of way.
Yeah, no, but I think that the way that they play it is what I'm saying, is that you feel like maybe the fact that, because you watch her, like you watch the mother in the background watching this, and there are some ways I think in which you're watching her watching this interaction, and this interaction is layered for multiple reasons, because when he starts talking about vigor, that's what the daughter says about Min, I think in the beginning, or they said these college students are so vigorous, and then he comes in later and he's like, oh, you need to have vigor. Like it's the same thing that I was talking about with the taking in information and then kind of regurgitating it as like your own, you know what I mean? Throughout the movie, they're kind of evolving this con. But I think that I don't think that, I mean, she's hired as an art therapist, which already I'm guessing, I don't know. So this is, I guess, to you, Varn, but the idea of kind of a therapist in general,
it's a pretty elite idea. Like I knew people who had mental health issues, expats from Europe and the United States and South Korea, and you would have to hide it, and you couldn't easily go to therapy, and if you did and your boss found out, you were going to be deported. So like it was, so that's a super elite thing and also kind of transgressive. But it's interesting that she comes in as an art tutor and then becomes an art therapist, like, because even there, like, you wouldn't have even the Park family wouldn't advertise that, like, so but what's interesting, if you like look at the social transgressions, the ones that get people fired are the ones that they care about. Smell, tuberculosis, which I guess kind of makes sense, but they're all things you can't control.
That would get you fired here,
right? I had a tuberculosis scare once, and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm not gonna be able to teach," and then I didn't have it.
Yeah,
It was
that's
fine.
the first thing they make you do is take a TB test to get
Right.
certified.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Long story. I've been sick in many foreign countries, so but I had a TB scare. It ended up being something else. But one of the things
you're
that
allergic to peaches, right?
yeah, sure. But if you look at what the social transgressions are, the ones that people can control are not punished. The ones that people can't control are. That's an interesting thing. That's a very subtle thing that I actually didn't notice the first time I watched the movie. But when I was watching it for you guys, I was like, oh, yeah, they're violating all these social norms.
The one that the guy is
the car driver's the only exception, right?
Yeah.
And that's also the one that's completely made up. It's a complete setup. I
remember watching Parasite in the theater when it first came out, and the idea for a leftist podcast came in 2019, in my mind after watching Parasite, and I just didn't have the courage to do it instantly. But I remember laughing hysterically I watched it with my brother, and we were both laughing the entire movie because the way that they played those scenes where they're setting everybody up is just so ridiculous. I mean, brilliant, but just so ridiculous that it got kind of played as almost like a hysterical montage. But in some ways, that's when you kind of realize how I guess how much sympathy and admiration almost that Bong Joon-ho has for these characters in the Kim family specifically, because the fact that they script out everything when they're doing the tuberculosis setup, you know what I mean? And then they show he's going against this kind of bootstraps mentality under neoliberalism, where it's oh, if you're poor, you're lazy, and saying no, if you're poor, you're unemployed. That's all that means, because you watch the Park family, and they are delusional a little bit and kind of slow and not quite none of them quite connect with anybody else in the family, which is a very interesting fact. And then you watch the Kim family, and the amount of effort that they put into these cons to get everybody fired is insane. The fact that they've scripted out everything the father is supposed to say, knowing that he's a good actor but not necessarily someone that could do that, improvise that. And he's going they're doing it back and forth, and they've kind of come up with every single every possible thing that could stop until find the original housekeeper knocks on the door. They've come up with all of these ideas about what if this happens, what if that happens, and it's kind of a brilliant, they're just so brilliant about the information that they've taken in.
Right. The only thing that messes it up is the fact that there's already a family that's already done this.
Yeah.
I do want to answer Jay Hutch's question really quickly. I think Varn had Shakazuma's revenge.
I had typhoid. Lost parts of my organs. Anyway. I think that's apt. It's interesting though, that cunningness is never used in a solidaristic way, except within the family, and that actually is kind of their undoing. So it's kind of everybody's undoing. Actually,
it's very neoliberal too, though, right?
Right.
Sorry,
yeah.
But just the fact that the powers.
No, Kenzo, just go. I'm sorry.
Just having the power concentrated in the nuclear family is just such a neoliberal. I mean, it's not even just neoliberal; it's a capitalist concept. And so I thought, that was interesting that way. That if the poor families did come together, they could have gotten their way out of the situation, but everyone was kind of fighting for themselves.
Yeah,
I mean the question of the question of property is central, right? To the whole movie itself. In addition to the nuclear family, it's the family home and the idea of private property itself. That's why I wonder, like, if this is like actually Bong Joon-ho being more radical by actually appearing less radical than in Snowpiercer, where he was like, overtly fleshing out like a class war, etc. Here, it's like a lot more internecine clashes between the among the working class itself, like between the petty bourgeois and the actual the blue collar elements. Or like actually two petty bourgeois elements. So I don't even know if there's actual working class solidarity here. But given the centrality of the house, what do you think of the concept of what do you think he's saying to the concept of private property itself?
I think there's a lot going on with private property, particularly in regards to the way that the housing crisis is exacerbated, the way that if you didn't try to own this space, even when their parents are literally like squatting in it, the attempt to own it actually begins to unravel everything. And I think, not to totally give away the film, but I also think that the fact that the only time, like by the time Kitek, the father, has class solidarity and acts out of that class solidarity, there's one time it comes up where Kitek is, because Kitek is, ironically, given what happens, actually probably the most empathetic member of the family, even more so than Kevin, Kiwoo. But Kitek is encouraged by his daughter, Jessica, whose name in Korean I keep forgetting, so that's why I keep calling her Jessica. He at the moment where the secret family shows up, the other former employees of the parks, is actually a moment right after there's a conversation between Jessica and Kitek, where Kitek is thinking about the people that got fired and like worried about it and feeling some solidarity with him, and Jessica says, "Focus on us. We have to, we have to get
and
by."
He's
and
drunk
then
at the time.
and he's drunk, exactly. And then at the end,
it's not quite solidarity; it's guilt, and the fact
right,
that
it's guilt, but it could have been solidarity.
Yeah,
well, yeah,
right?
it's also
100%.
a bit of going back to Confucianism, the concept that he has to also be the father to the other people around him because he's older. And I think he's the oldest character besides the guy in the basement, but he's like the oldest man in the film. So in a way, he also has, feels that cultural responsibility for those around him.
Yeah,
but
I think the fact that over and over again that they're acting out of this guilt and not out of solidarity is the undoing, because the way that they treat these characters is like at the last minute they're like, oh, let's make sure they're not dead, or oh, like I feel bad that they got fired, and it's not a solidaristic action. And I think the family is an incredibly important part of this movie, because you could say in some ways you could have incorporated other people into that family, other working class people, and the fact that it is kind of that they like the parasitic, I guess, metaphor kind of goes around the fact that they've kind of replaced all these other workers that, instead of feeling some kind of solidaristic feelings towards them, they think of themselves as their replacement.
And then when they're at that point where, the older workers are just that destitute, dying, it's charity. It's broke people helping out poor people, absolutely destitute people. Like, one of the things that was also occurring to me talking about housing was I was looking at this a lot through a Japanese lens, just because it's the closest framework that I have. And in Japan, there basically are like two types of people who own property. There are people that have, like in my family, we live in rural Japan, and that the same house is passed down for generations. When the oldest son is supposed to stay back, raise a family, their grandparents help out, die off, and then they inherit the house. And like for my family's house, it was like a one level. And then when more kids came into the picture, they had to build up because they don't have zoning laws the way they do now. So you can just do that. But also, like, land is such a premium that, people aren't buying property. And then like the other group of people who own property are wealthy people. Cause like, Varn, what you're talking about with the key money, like it's virtually impossible to own something. So it's not so much in a people's framework, especially people living in cities, that, you have a right to a home or something that, is within possibility.
So I would say the Japanese context would actually help you with the Korean context, with one exception. That rural stuff that you're talking about was wiped out by the Japanese in Korea. Just to point out like why that might be a sore point if Koreans listening to this podcast. But if you go and this is actually an interesting developmental thing about South Korea. If you go even into rural areas now, those high-rise apartment complexes are there. It is very rare. In fact, you pretty much have to live in a protected historical district to find old style housing or single dwelling housing, unless you are ultra rich. Mm-hmm. So like that's just basically kind of unheard of.
This cues up, I guess, this last movie based clip before the Trump one and the memes, which is kind of this is, I think, damage control. This is damage control from a South Korean news station, first trying to justify where the semi-basement houses come from. But then after that, it's Bong Joon-ho and the actor that plays Kevin kind of talking about the design. So this is our last non-Trump related Parasite clip.
Oh, and the actor is Woo Sik Choi.
The poor Kim family has to go down a set of stairs to their 반지하, with 반 meaning semi and jiha meaning basement in Korean. Parasite juxtaposes the Kim's squalid semi-basement flat against the rich Park family's airy mansion to mirror the wealth gap between the Kim and Park families. Parasite is a work of fiction, but 반지하 is not. Outside Bong's fictional world, 반지하 is a housing option that has provided homes for urban dwellers hunting for affordable housing in South Korea, mainly in Seoul. This week, Korea will look into the 반지하, where hundreds of thousands of people end up living while they work hard and hope for a better future. The history of semi-basement flats dates back to 1970, when the government mandated basement floors in construction projects. Some foreign media reported that the 반지하 originated from an air-raid shelter created by the danger of war with North Korea, but it was not confirmed. As the city's population swelled in line with the country's rapid industrialization, the underground spaces eventually became an inevitable alternative. In 1984, the government relaxed regulations allowing basement flats to be built higher, with half of them being underground and half above ground, coining the term 반지하. The move was seen as legalizing underground residences, which had already become a regular housing option for the needy. Decades later, 반지하 is still a cheap housing option in the city, where median apartment prices have topped 900 million won, almost $760,000, while the minimum monthly wage stands at 1.8 million won, around $1,500. There were more than 360,000 households living in basement or semi-basement flats in 2015, accounting for 1.9% of all households. According to the latest data by the state-run Korean Statistical Information Service, some 62% of these basement flats were located in Seoul, reflecting the staggering property prices in the capital, where 1/5 of the national population lives. In South Korea, 반지하 typically represent the lowest social class or poverty. Some even argue that the existence of 반지하 is a proof that Seoul's gap between rich and poor is serious. As seen in the film, 반지하 is not the most pleasant place to live in. The family's toilet, which ironically sits higher than other areas of the house to prevent flooding, nonetheless spews out filthy sludge during a flood. Light is a scarce resource, with the sunlight touching the house only in limited times of the day, causing the walls to mold. The well of Mr. Park founds at Kim Gi-taek's stench, which his daughter later sums up as a smell the Kim family will only be able to get rid of when they move up from the moldy flat. But things are changing, albeit slowly. First of all, the number of these basement flats is actually declining. A rush of urban redevelopment projects are bringing down old buildings with these semi-basement flats. there has also been a shift in how some Banjia dwellers think about their homes. A quick search on social media using the hashtag Banjiha fetches thousands of photos of semi-basement houses renovated in style. For them, it is no longer something to be ashamed of. Therefore, critics point out that it is inappropriate to magnify the existence of Banjiha to the extreme inequality in South Korea or simply generalize Banjia residents as being poor. On the other hand, however, it is also true that moving up the ladder still seems to be quite difficult, as you can see the Kim family eventually going back to their own place in the movie.
The first scene is view from my house.
한국에선 반지하라고 하죠. Semi basement is very specific the way of Korean living for the poor people, but actually semi basement means also semi overground.
Yeah, so it gives you like a little bit of hope because it's not like fully underground, but half away.
Actually, yeah, this is it looks like a real location, but actually it's all
made up set. Yeah, so this whole street, this building.
Actually, until
that.
This is the borderline.
Yeah.
This is the whole set. The more far background is the VFX.
We had this
computer graphic
blue screen here, right?
Yeah.
And then
and production design team, they did such a great job. And actually 이 여기 표면에 보이는 간판이나 이런 재료들은 만든 게 아니라 띄워온 거예요.
Yeah, we actually
실제 가난한 동네에서 띄워왔지. And one guy is coming. Your friend is coming.
Yeah, so I included that last part of it, Andy, because I wanted to kind of call back to when we talked about Mad Max, and one of the things that George Miller was talking about with Fury Road is that they salvaged pretty much everything in the movie. So I thought it was really interesting that in this neighborhood that they kind of designed as a set, they like salvaged a lot of stuff. And Bong Joon-ho is someone that actually has talked about Fury Road. Like he's been on panels with George Miller and talked about it. So it's interesting that he kind of took that model of set design, because I think that that's a really amazing model of set design.
Well,
especially
I mean, whenever he did the host, he wanted the creature to look sexier. Like if I remember correctly, I think it was Benicio del Toro who they tried to make the creature look like.
Yeah.
So I mean, he really does think about things in a very unique way when it comes to approach of looks of everything. So I always appreciated that.
He has 5,000. He says he has either 5,000 or 6,000 DVDs in his DVD collection. So like the amount of time he spent watching international movies, because they're not like, it's not like he has he has all kinds of movies in this DVD collection. He's talked about it pretty endlessly. So it's like the way that he watches movies is like insane compared even to like directors in the United States that are like, oh well, we watch a lot of movies. Like I understand, like this is, he gave himself like a crash course in international cinema. And you could tell with Snowpiercer especially, like that's something that he thought a lot about. But like with Parasite too.
I mean, every single movie I've seen of his.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely comes to the level of like being an educated, filmmaker, as far as like just being aware of, and he also references so many movies in like his films as well. Like there are a lot of references to films that we have. Like I thought of how much the set design and the kind of movement in this film is almost like this film is in constant motion. Like every scene like moves into the other, and like where there is a pause, it's almost like extremely deliberate. And a lot of the way that the blocking and the characters behave, a lot of the actions seem reminiscent of like Jean-Pierre Jeunet and like Amélie or like Delicatessen, these type of movies which are like extremely visual in nature and also interestingly showcase like a certain kind of, I think he's the guy who I believe made the good Alien movie, right? Like also
it was a terrible movie, but yeah, it was
Alien 4
Resurrection.
Oh, he made Alien 4. I thought he made Alien 2. Who made Alien?
That's James Cameron.
There's James Cameron.
That's James Cameron still. Okay. Alien 2 is the good one. So I don't know.
I appreciate
think
Alien 4.
No, I think that what you're saying with pauses is on point, and I think that a lot of times when he pauses in this movie, it's to show you where they're learning to continue their con. Because the one big pause is the scene that you pointed out, Karthik, in that message. That I can think of, like the first big pause where he runs out, and what I noticed this time rewatching it after your message is when Min first stops the homeless guy, or the drunk guy peeing outside, he says, "Get a grip." Like that's it. But he says it in like an authoritative tone, like get a grip on yourself. Which obviously, in a more Confucian and hierarchical society, is kind of an authoritative thing to say to someone else. When Kevin runs out with the bucket and gives water on him, he yells after the guy's already peeing on him, "Get a grip," which as the father runs out, which the double meaning is like, number one, like the father needs to get a grip on the thing to like hit him with the water, and also so it's not an authoritative tone, it's not like a respectful tone, it's his class is kind of shown within that because the guy doesn't have respect for him, in the same way that when Min comes out and says, "Get a grip," like the guy stops peeing and like is more cloying. So there's that pause, and then the other pause that's the most amazing one, like visually and just that sticks with you, is the flooding. And then the flooding, obviously, you get to see the failure of their plan and everything unraveling, which I think does come from a lack of solidarity. But then you also see the next scene, which is the Park family throwing a party. And she says, like, "Oh, it was raining yesterday, but like, oh, well, isn't it kind of a blessing? Like lemons into lemonade, like the pollution, there's no more pollution in the sky," which when you look at their apartment flooding with literal shit water, is the entire thing is polluted. But her version of it is like, "Oh, lemons into lemonade, like we're not, everything's no longer polluted. Isn't it beautiful?" And it's like, so even the public space, even the outdoor space is commodified. And even the outdoor space responds to that same, to those same class incentives. Because for rich people, the rain means like all of a sudden, like it's beautiful outside the next day and it smells like rain. And, you can just get drunk in the daytime, as they say in the movie. And for, poor people, their house is filled with shit water and is literally forever polluted.
I like the fact that she still lights a cigarette sitting on the toilet. That's kind of like that's how it is, right? Like you kind of get through it by taking that break.
It's almost
and that's
like
kind of how. Yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say like Winona Ryder at the end of Heathers with the cigarette dangling out of her mouth. That similar visual.
Well, you also obviously this is a Chinese movie, not a Korean movie, but like Kung Fu Hustle, where the landlady that has the lion's roar has the cigarette dangling out of her mouth the entire movie. It's like kind of a sign of like, it's like a working class toughness, a working class sheen that you can only like, that's honestly really beautiful in some ways and strong and powerful, but that you can only really get from this working class suffering. I mean, even as some kind of landlady in that movie, like it still is like their poverty kind of gives them this rough exterior that is kind of like a beautiful thing to witness.
And it's prescient that it's also the character who dies. I mean, not to spoil them.
But I was about to say, like, I think
kills,
I think Bong Joon-ho actually really is really wary of romanticizing poverty. I think that I don't think it just comes up in this movie. And Jessica being both the resilient one, but also kind of the person who is the most self-interested in a way that is totally rational. This is like I always object to like when highfalutin communists start talking about false consciousness, because I'm like, well, no, it's a difference in short-term versus long-term consciousness. Because if you take the short-term apparatus like calculations here, every step they make that actually ends up to the ending of the movie is perfectly fucking logical. Like, and Jessica is the voice of that. Like over and over and over again.
It's both logical and absurdist in an almost fairy tale sense.
Well,
And
the one thing I really liked about Jessica is that, like, so, you know, Kevin and they kind of set the motion, like, okay, the morality of this family is we're going to, you know, be parasites or whatever off of this wealthier family. So that was already set in motion. But Jessica is just such an
It would have been
aggressive,
really funny if they had said
ambitious
that.
person
Like, they
that
had
she
said,
was
"Hey,
just
you
like
guys ready to be parasites or whatever?" So
the titular line.
That's
They
for the
just
American version with Tom
look to the
Holland.
camera. It's parasite time. But you know, but she was like the accelerant. Like it wasn't her idea, but she's like, okay, we're committed to this shit. And then she's the one that like is almost the matriarchal figure in the family in that way, because she like she's like, okay, lights fire under everyone's ass.
She's the brains, right? Like she's kind of like the character from Wakanda, the scientist
Shuri?
lady.
Shuri?
In the brother, the sister of the.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no,
Right.
you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of similar. Like it's a sister character that it's kind of, and it's also similar to Snowpiercer, where the Kim, not the Kim family, but the basement family mother also has like a similar kind of matriarchal, you know, attitude about her, where she's supposed to be the gatekeeper, but then she kind of is made to, you know, eat shit and you know, leave the house by the one that upstages her. You know, so it's kind of interesting.
I do love the line though where she's like, they're all like kind of kissing Min's ass about giving them the Scholar Rock, and she said food would be better.
Right. Yeah.
Which is like the most perfect, like, you know, like poverty line, I guess, in terms of like rich people are always like, oh, let's give you a gift that has no actual bearing on your situation. Like, let's give you a gift that's literally pointless. I'm gonna give you
like a coffee mug instead of like
Yeah.
an actual bonus.
So
for
yeah,
the
there's a whole, but there's an irony to that too. I mean, there's something being shown about, because Min is actually giving them food, like Min is coming there. The Scholar Rock is actually like a symbolic thing for the thing that he does do, which is like, I want you to weirdly and believably actually to watch.
I want you to watch the 14-year-old girl I want to bang.
Yeah, that I want to marry.
Because you're a cuck, and I know you're not gonna get it. So
right, but also like you get there's class stuff with Min too. Min is not rich. Min is in the intermediary social class.
And I was gonna ask about that, because I think that Min is a character that it kind of symbolizes their class aspirations. It is halfway between, you know, an upper class situation. He's clearly not, but also like, you know, upper class enough that his grandfather is able to like collect Scholar Rocks and not like, you know, collect food for all of them. Like, and I think that it's a pretty, I mean, common thing even in the US that, you know, you'll have, like, because I'm someone that's never been, you know, like my mom at least is like, you know, the middle class status of it has never, like, she's never really made that moment, you know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of always been like a more lower class life that I have, but like you still do interact with people that and make friends with people that aren't necessarily, that are above your social class, I guess, in that way. Like, so sometimes you do have people that lift you up in that sense, and I think that the way that they do it isn't like some kind of like, oh, Min's their savior. Like it's a very realistic, like you probably like Kevin had gone to school with him and become friends, and then he's like, you know what, you're kind of harmless. He invites the titular parasite into the situation because it's kind of like, you're harmless, and then from there it spreads.
Right. He was harmless until he actually crossed the threshold into the rich house and started gaining that information, like you were talking about.
Which kind of makes the house the host,
right?
Sense. Like, yeah.
I think it's interesting though to think about like the criterion, because half of what Min is doing is utterly selfish, but the other half that Min says is like, you're not a drunkard at a Korean university who actually doesn't really know anything and has only gotten that position because of your social status. So you actually probably can really teach her well enough that you're not going to hurt my reputation.
Yeah. So and it shows that he's not totally comfortable with the drunken frat boys in that university either.
Well, I mean, it's not, and well, what he's not comfortable with is that they're not really competent. Like the drunkenness in Korea has
Yeah.
no.
But it seems like
whatsoever.
Min in some ways was competent enough at least to teach her. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
which is where the intermediary status comes from, I think.
Right, and Kiwoo is also competent enough because he says you've taken the entrance exam 3 times, and this is a kind of commentary on capitalism and imperialism in Korea. That to get into university in Korea, you have to be good, not at spoken English, because even when the rich family speaks English, it's usually slightly wrong and hard to understand. But at a kind of written English to get through those exams, it's super important. There's like all these Americans who teach at these Hagwons, which is like 90% of the people who from the United States, Canada, South Africa, etc., who teach in Korea. They go just so people can pass that test. That is all that it is about. And so, like, it was actually interesting to me. One of the things that's interesting about South Korea.
This has to be the last point before we get into the fun stuff,
right?
Because we're hitting that point really fast.
Yeah. Very quickly. Is you also have that you can't legally hire a foreign tutor. It's illegal. Although rich families will often do it. If that's a foreigner, you get caught doing private tutoring through like not through your institution. You can, well, I don't know if it's still true, but 10 years ago you get deported. So that's why they're hiring like a Korean tutor, because otherwise they would hire a foreigner for prestige reasons, if no other reason. So that's the last point.
Yeah, sorry. I'm trying to get through this last 10 minutes. I really want Kenzo to be here to rate the Parasite memes. So that's kind of like the reason that so
yeah, and I also have to leave.
Yeah. All right. So this is quickly, it's 40 seconds. It's the Trump response, and then we'll look at the Parasite memes and we'll rank them very quickly. But
Wait, how bad were the Academy Awards this year? Did you see it? And the winner is a movie from South Korea. What the hell was that all about? We got enough problems with South Korea with trade. On top of it, they give him the best movie of the year. Was it good? I don't know. You know, I'm looking for like where let's get Gone with the Wind. Can we get like Gone with the Wind back, please? Sunset Boulevard. So many great movies. The winner is from South Korea. I thought it was best foreign film, right? Best foreign movie. No, it was did this ever happen before?
This ever happened before?
By the way,
it is a historic film, like really though. I mean, I have to say it's probably like one of the best movies of the century so far, like has been made. And it's definitely warranted.
There's no way that Trump understood the point of Sunset Boulevard. That's also
he was just fast forwarding to the scenes where Jean-Claude Van Damme was fighting.
And he probably just like Gone with the Wind because there's rape in it.
All right, no.
Well, I remember the whole thing about Bloodsport. Like he'd watch it with one of his fail sons, and they would just fast forward it to the fight scenes and wouldn't actually watch the movie. So, like, I just imagine that's how he watched Gone with the Wind. Is like, that's the part he fast forwards to, and then to the end where he hears his damn and just like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
big fire and forced sex.
So this is the meme rating section of it, I guess. I thought this one was funny today. I saw it on Reddit. Reading a SoundCloud artist in person you've listened to for years, and he says, "You know me." He says, "Respect."
I know that feeling.
There's a lot more class conscious ones coming up, but I thought that one was funny. This is the Bradley Whitford not getting the point of Parasite, which, if you remember, he didn't get the point of Get Out. Like he thought that for Obama a third time. He didn't get that was like a line kind of making fun of liberals. He's like, yeah, I would have, sure. So sorry. Yeah, what a fucking simp. I don't know. I thought that one was funny.
I made one of the car meme, but was Lori Lightfoot in the back seat, or no, I labeled the in the back seat Lori Lightfoot, and the driver I labeled Chicago teachers, like right when she forced us back in the line. It went pretty viral in Chicago.
I like
you could do that for any mayor though.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I like Call Me John D because I'm about to Rockefeller.
Oh.
it's when he gets hit with the fucking rock.
That one's just so wholesome.
Yeah, I know. I see the ones that I found that were like really class conscious are like at the beginning of the list, so it's going backwards from that. Oh, that one was twice. Yeah, see, starting at this.
So they're about to drive into James Corden, is it?
Yeah. No, someone put up this one the other day, and it was when they did the James Corden when everyone was dancing in front of the fucking cars.
We were all thinking it.
Yeah.
I think Six tweeted it.
I'm going to use this opportunity to put it out there. If someone is thrusting their crotch at your car, that is street harassment.
It is,
and you do not have to take it.
Oh, is that
especially if it's James Corden?
He looks
practically a eunuch. I feel like.
I mean, I was about to say I think I saw something in that clip and it wasn't pleasant. And entails he's maybe not a eunuch.
All right. Well, but no, this was when all the celebrities fucking sang Imagine at the beginning of the pandemic. And there was another one that was similar to that one that probably was better made, but like yes,
the
that
best
I think
have a little slop on them though.
Yeah. I think starting with the James Corden one, that one takes the cake for me. In that list. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I know. I kind of felt that first one about the SoundCloud, yes.
Yeah. Well, I feel that too after Izu because my old roommate, like my former roommate's roommate before me, played at Izu this year and did a really fucking amazing set with like a lot of people fucking listening. So I was like, that's somebody that I knew from like way back that I was like, hell yeah, like respect. There was one more that I guess I didn't end up putting on the list, which was it was $1 trillion slush fund was the rich lady, and then it said like a $1,200 stimulus check. But yeah.
I really like the James Corden one because memes, their value is timeliness. So, and I'm still a little mad about that, as opposed to the Imagine one, which is so long ago now that it's probably worse. But I'm not mad about it anymore.
Yeah. So I guess this is time for final thoughts. I'll let Andy go first really fast because he has to go.
No, thank you. This was a blast. I've been procrastinating watching it because of all the obnoxious people like Bradley Whitford and President Obama watching the movie. And I'm just like, do I really want to watch something that these guys are watching? And so I didn't until
I don't think Bradley Whitford watched it.
Judging by that. People have really bad takes on these things. Speaking of which, that's where I got to go. But I do want to just shout out Kang Ho Song, who played Kai Take. Hopefully, I'm getting that right. But he was he was kind of the standout in this movie. He was the one movie star in this film, and you can actually see that. Even though Woo Sik Choi was fantastic as Kevin.
He's now going to be in a Marvel movie. They have him in an upcoming Marvel movie.
Is he? Because I thought his co-star from Train to Busan was in Eternals.
He's been tapped for one coming up.
Oh, okay. Because I loved him.
Yeah,
I loved him in Train to Busan. So
yeah, let's do that like this month we'll do a Thursday. We'll do a horror Thursday, which I'm trying to do less streams than we have because literally I think tomorrow is the 2-month anniversary of this, and we've done 16 episodes. But like yeah. But you know, I want to do that this month at some point. So we'll figure that out. But thanks for being on, Andy.
All right, thank you guys. Great talking to everybody.
Andy.
Kenzo, I'll let you go next because I know you have to go as well.
Actually, real quick, I want to talk. Karthik, you mentioned Wakanda, and you know from Black Panther. But every time someone talks about Wakanda as like a real place, there's a town in Illinois called Wakanda, Illinois, and like my fond memories of the town is that's where we go apple picking. But it's actually a really terrible reactionary place. That's one town over from Antioch, where Kyle Rittenhouse is from. Like that's where that's like the real white flight. Like, you know, we have the suburbs and we have exurbs. If you're like on the Wisconsin border, you really are afraid of black people. And so that's why it's always.
They're not saying Wisconsin forever.
I bet you people in Wakanda hate the fact that their town sounds exactly like Wakanda from Black Panther.
That is pretty funny, yeah. And I mean, like, I'm glad that you brought up an instance of white flight because it does, like, this movie does like end on the note of like a complete foreigners buying up the property. So yeah, on that note, please go ahead. I don't want to interrupt your flow.
Oh, and I just gotta head out actually. Put my child to bed. But thanks for having me on, Forrest. Good to see you, Varn. Good to see you, Karthik. And Andy, good to see you wherever you are.
This is one of those movies I feel like that is like you could talk about for hours, and yeah. So yeah, I completely understand. All right, well, thanks for being on.
Take care.
I'll talk to you tomorrow. All right, Karthik, final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I kind of somewhere between the middle, somewhere in the middle of this conversation, I think I started seriously thinking about it from the standpoint of whether Parasite. I mean, at first I kind of came in thinking Parasite is actually a movie where the concept of the film, like the literary, the story concept, kind of took over far more than the politics of it, in a way that it rendered the story so complex that you cannot fully like come out with a full-throated like revolutionary statement. And I think that's kind of interesting because it's the revolutionary statement itself, that there is no real like uprising that's gonna like totally transfer property or power from one group to the other in a neat sort of way. There's like losses on all fronts, and like nobody really is like a winner, so to say. And like the house actually moves over to a kind of like we just noted foreign buyer, and it kind of even raises the question of whether a lot of indigeneity and all of that is getting sacrificed in this like struggle among like the underdog to keep the roof over their own heads, and that they end up kind of like losing their sovereignty in the process. And it made me like think of a lot of these kind of questions, and I think that's what makes really great art, like what makes Bong Joon-ho a really great artist singularly, because he's able to not like allow you to walk away with these kind of straightforward interpretations, kind of like Hitchcock, kind of like that's why I think when Trump says like a movie from South Korea, I feel like Bong Joon-ho really is an exception to any kind of just like a international film getting nominated, or an international filmmaker who's good in his or her or their respective industry. I think he has like a vision that I think totally transcends politics even, and like gets into the story very intricately. And I think that like maybe that's something that happened here, which didn't really happen with Snowpiercer, which I would really like to hear what you two have to say about that, because maybe it's a little less political is something that I thought, because the story kind of absorbs a lot of the politics into the complexity that it's hard to close this story in a neat with a neat political statement.
Well, I think what one political statement, and then I'll let Varn go. I just have one quick one to say that I got at the end of this movie every time I've watched it, is that the artistic potential, the creative potential, the work ethic of people in the lower classes that aren't necessarily getting in any capacity to express that, because it's the people in the upper classes that get to express their creative potential and their potential as kind of intellectuals and thinkers. Like the fact that, you know, the lower classes aren't getting to express that potential is something that's actually detrimental to society, which is a thing that I 100% agree with. But it is a statement that Bong Joon-ho is making, because the society that he's creating within this movie is not efficient whatsoever. There's no efficiency to people kind of faking their way through these technological ideas, like Mr. Park being the head of a company, like the song being able to kind of just be 8, and like instead of having you know, if whether or not he has mental illness, like just be thought of as a creative genius for you know, because his parents are kind of whether that's a cultural thing or whether that's just in general, you know, being young parents, like, which is something they allude to within the movie, like it's, you know, as the sister says, like he's kind of faking it. So the idea that, you know, that the most hardworking and like amazingly creative people in the movie are not, you know, they're able to express it in terms of this con that they're pulling. They're not able to express it within a way that's going to benefit society as a whole. So I think that is kind of a revolutionary statement. Yeah.
It's a little pessimistic also, you know, in a way. The fact that the basement dweller bangs his head against the, you know, the switchboard, the switch to send the signal in Morse code, smacks of like a creative solution in a desperate kind of situation.
Yeah.
It's
Which
an
is
extremely
what they all smack of
yeah.
this movie.
That's right, and the thing is that like the amount that gets accomplished is very little, right? You're only able to send a brief, like a signal of hope. It's almost like barely any hope that you have, which is the same as the kind of. It's interesting that the architect in the video clip alluded to this as well, because the basement, from the basement house, it's also half up, and like he's able to see that there is hope involved in the fact that you can see some amount of the street. I think that's the kind of way that, you know, back at the end, they're all back in the basement, and the dad is like, you know, just like pressing the switch to communicate to the son and hoping that he reaches. So it's kind of like a very, I don't know what that hope represents. I don't know how much hope that is. And it definitely sounds a lot bleaker than, you know, Snowpiercer, even though Snowpiercer was like still only 2 people survived. More survival rate here, but still, like, it seems far bleaker.
I guess my final thought on what you're saying is, I don't think Bong Joon-ho would have thought of this, but I think that also allowing like a lot of the poorest people in cities across America to see the cityscape, like especially in New York City, the fact that they can kind of witness a cityscape that to a lot of people represents endless possibility, architecturally. I think it is a similar kind of hope in desperate situations. But yeah, Varn, sorry.
So I think it's even bleaker than you think. I think it's deliberately bleaker than you think. I think there is a social realism to the ending, and that is what Kiwoo takes away from the SOS letter that he eventually puts together, is not that he should rescue his father. It's not that he should, you know, embrace the solidarity, which his father actually does embrace in an act of revenge that ends up not meaning much.
Mean really nothing to the broader society. It means something to him maybe, but like he doesn't quite, I don't think, know why he did it.
Right. But what Kiwoo takes away from it is that he needs to get rich to buy a house to reunite with his father, just perpetuating the entire situation. And so,
and making the house the host. I mean, you know, making the metaphor of the parasite, that actually everybody within the house is the parasite, because the house is going to keep perpetuating these situations, because the father ends up back in the basement, which perpetuates the situation too. Like, you know what I mean? Like the house actually is the host, and everybody within the house is some kind of parasitic like emblem, I guess.
They can't live without it. Yeah.
But the hope that they end up getting from everything is always, it actually seems to make things worse for them. Like from being able to see the city and imagine that you can get out of it instead of fighting your way out, to imagining you could earn enough money to buy the house. In Kiwoo, mistakenly believes that Korean society is meritocratic enough that if he tries, he might, even though everything prior to this indicates that that's not a possibility. And now he has a record. So there's almost no way that can happen. So, I mean, I listened to Bong Joon-ho talk about this, and he actually did sound, you know, I said he was a Marxist, and he is actually, but he's a very pessimistic Marxist, because he keeps on talking about how he wants people to change the world, but that he doesn't think that artists should be necessarily perpetuating that vision. That maybe people can, but it's not what he does. That he just wants to show the world to people, and that is like that in of itself would be a kind of revolutionary act to like show it unvarnishedly. And that's the bleakness of the ending there. I mean, I think there is also there is the absolute acknowledgement of the fact that, this family's hardworking. They're unbelievably intelligent. I mean, the kinds of stuff, the kinds of MacGyver-esque situation. But it is, Bong Joon-ho is also a master of like changing genres on you. And the fact it moves from like a black farce into a out and out horror movie,
right. No pun
is
intended,
important.
the Germans
but I mean, I think that's intentional. It's also, I mean, it is like the end of Snowpiercer in a way, because I agree with you, Karthik, that Snowpiercer is a more optimistic movie, but it's two people who survived the train crash who literally step into a wasteland. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
like there's nothing left for them really. They might be lucky with the bug food. So I mean, like,
no, they got a polar bear to eat.
Yeah,
it was so hilarious to have Andre on when we did Snowpiercer, because literally being from Canada, like he made the polar bear joke, and then I was like, well, they could have eaten the polar, like.
As a side note, I found it funny that Bong Joon-ho portrayed like this moral horror of eating bugs, and I'm like, but like it's part of Korean cuisine. I mean, like I don't like. I think he's making fun of us right now. But anyway, that's not about this movie.
Bugs, we eat bugs too. Like our red dye comes from bugs. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean. Like the
cochineal's bug. But
yeah.
But we don't like to know we eat bugs.
Yeah, just by Americans being overweight, and just people in general, like everybody opening their mouth while they sleep, like, which obviously everybody across the world does, but like especially here, like you swallow a lot, like you swallow at least 8 bugs a year is like I don't know how they came up with that figure as 8. I assume it's more, but like. I felt like he was making fun of his international audience with the bug thing in that movie, but it is a very bleak movie, and I still think I don't think it's guilty of like what like Mark Fisher would call capitalist realism, because it does seem to think that another world is possible, but it doesn't seem to think it's likely, and it also seems to question, like, even though these people are super creative, even though all these other things, they also are perpetuating what is happening to them, and that I think that's a lot more. I think American audiences can take away the long lesson from that, but I think it is interesting that if this was like it's guilty of almost like a new left Howard Zinn mentality, because like the change that I think that Bong Joon-ho envisions is like is violent class struggle in a way that isn't necessarily helpful. It's funny though, because I was listening to the Russell Brand Capitalist Realism audiobook. I don't know if you guys have seen that exists, but literally today while I was doing my bike ride, because I was watching The Wire last night, and then I was like, why? The Wire, I think, is probably the most. I've said this like since first reading capitalist realism like a few years ago. Like the Wire, I think, is the most visible representation of the concept of capitalist realism that will ever exist in any capacity, because there's no alternative system. Like the end of the Wire is obviously that the system is just perpetuated endlessly and there's no getting out of it. Like the reform mentality obviously fails because there's always like an up above, there's always like an upper place that someone can reach to. And so I was listening to capitalist realism today and thinking about whether Parasite represents that, and I agree with you, it doesn't at all, because I think that Bong Joon-ho is hopeful in a way that like Thatcherite or like neoliberal, like even the people that understand that political like endless system aren't. Because I think The Wire criticizes neoliberalism in a way that no other show really does. Like the targeted like the fact that everywhere you go, any public utility that you use, like there's always these targets you have to reach, and the targets, like obviously it just ends up with people faking the target numbers and the statistics, and doesn't end up with any actual change. I think Parasite and Snowpiercer and all of Bong Joon-ho's work cries out for a solution. I just don't think he thinks he's the one to come up with that solution.
I think he seems to really, and I guess like it's honest to his career. Seems to believe that like an infiltration method is possible, that you can actually get into the system and like sneak in and like operate on the sly and sneak something past, like get something through, or like make something happen like that, cause some change, shake the rattle the cage, as like he says it in I think Batman Begins, like something that he thinks. I mean, he's definitely not Christopher Nolan level, like just libertarian. I'll just get to do whatever the fuck I want kind of attitude either. But more along the lines of he does want to.
You can see that in his personal interactions in these interviews. Right. Like he downplays his own leftism, and I think that Varn's right about that being a thing with South Korea in general and the South Korean government probably, but it's also a thing in navigating the Oscar system, and it's also a thing in navigating a system that doesn't want to put out foreign movies in the US, and kind of the US is this huge market. And like we watched the clip of him talking about Harvey Weinstein and how he very deftly in a similar way, I think, to kind of what happened in Parasite with like the conning, like where he kind of told Harvey Weinstein like, my father was a fisherman and that's why I want this fish scene, and like came up with this whole story and lied to him and then felt bad about it, but also like realized that was the way he was going to get his movie passed through that. Like I think that there's this internationalist perspective where you realize that like the way that you can navigate through both the South Korean government for sure, because he's incredibly he seems incredibly excited that President Moon, when I watched that one clip, is like praising Parasite, and then that actually got a bunch of money put into refurbishing and like changing these semi-basement apartments. Like they started investing money in that because the Moon's administration was kind of embarrassed about the fact that now internationally everybody knows that that's a big part of South Korean poverty. But also at the same time navigating your way through this Oscar system in this case, where people that are exactly like the fucking art family, like first, are kind of coming up to you being like, oh, I loved your movie. This is great. I'm so happy I saw it. Class consciousness. Yeah. Right. Like he seems very adept at navigating those worlds in a way that, well, number one, I wonder if his translator is also in on that, because he seems he seems to use the same translator every time. So it's interesting to see. Like I wonder what behind the scenes he's saying to his translator, like, we got to sell this movie to a US public that's not going to be fucking ready to see it.
Yeah. I would say that that listening to him speak, he is that, like, I'm not fluent in Korean, but I do understand it pretty well, and the translation does sound fairly accurate to what he's saying. It does feel very scripted, actually, but both things.
But he also picks out which words he's gonna say in English.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like he says full sentences in English and then he'll switch back to Korean. And I'm not saying that I think that his translator is changing fundamentally anything he's saying. I don't think she is. But what I'm saying is the fact that he uses the same translator, I wonder if it's kind of like societally, I guess. Like there are times where something you're saying in one language sounds harsher than something that you maybe want to say in English on the word show trail.
Oh, so, yeah, sure.
I just wonder, like, yeah.
I think he definitely wants to say it in both languages, and I think he wants to like say it in Korean because it sounds, you know, authentic to what he wants to say, and I don't know if he's like deliberately playing with like these words that he specifically points out in English, or if it's just like a natural inflection that just comes with like being bilingual in this respect. But I think that's mostly the my take on the Korean and the translation is like. Kind of both allowing himself the opportunity to say it the way he would like to in a kind of way that's like distant also, and I completely relate to that. Like, you know, it'd be a way to kind of, you know, come meet me where I'm at rather than you know, me coming to, like, a lot of times I think even a kind of interesting connection, but like the Zizek Peterson debate, a lot of it came down to the fact that Peterson is just like a just generally better spoken person in the language, because he was born, raised in these circumstances, and Zizek didn't come from these circumstances. Therefore, like he had like
him in that debate.
Yeah, of course. But at the same time, if there was any kind of decent showing that this man had at all, it was just because he was a native speaker. And like, Zizek kind of like didn't really have that. And there were a lot of times when he had the kind of poise, and Zizek appeared like a little, like, you know, frazzled, etc., just because he was trying to put the words together in his head to see what he had to say. Whereas like Peterson, on the other hand, like had a little more, except when he actually had to talk about theoretically, you know, rigorous stuff, in which case he really didn't have much to offer. But like whenever he had to come with like a pat response, I think like there's a little kind of home turf advantage that I think, especially if you were born, raised in the United States and you're coming to the Academy Awards, it brings to you. But I think he doesn't want to give that kind of, he doesn't want to be on the back foot. I feel like that's it. Like he wants it to be on his terms.
Well, if you've ever had, I don't know, I had my apartment roasted by Zizek on a stream, so I take offense to the fact that Zizek doesn't know exactly how to use the English language, because he roasted.
Of course he does, yeah.
No, but I'm saying, like, he roasted the fuck out of my apartment when I was on a fucking stream with him. I still have that video. No, I agree with you. I think that with Jordan Peterson, the interesting thing specifically in that example is that Jordan Peterson uses inflection. He has like this strange academic sounding inflection that, like, when you actually look at the words, he's like, when you read something Jordan Peterson's wrote, you're like, this is incoherent. But when he uses like the inflection, that he like uses these specific pauses, you're like, this sounds like it could be right. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
But I think I'm going to cut it in a second. I wanted to play as a way to play us out, because I never do this anymore. I wanted to play the James Austin Johnson Trump impression where he talks about Scooby-Doo, because I was watching that earlier. But I thank you guys for coming on so much. I think that this was a great conversation. I wish we had like an endless amount of time to specifically talk about this movie, because I think that no matter how long you spend talking about this movie, there's like an infinite other amount of things you can say about it. And you know, I mean, that's good cinema, you know, like just in general, like regardless of whether it's
Scooby-Doo,
regardless of whether it's class conscious or not. I think it says a lot about like, you know, how amazing cinema is when you can just, like, the amount of details in it, you can spend an endless amount of time talking about it. So I'm gonna leave it there, and thank you guys for coming on. And I do want to do Train to Busan at some point before Halloween. I think that would be really fun. And
I think the second movie is also out, right? We could
What, the US
number
one?
2 is also.
You can double feature it.
Oh, there's a
Right.
Yeah, we could double feature it. Well, I'd like to do that either sometime in September or in October, definitely.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I'm gonna leave it there. Thanks so much.
Scooby-Doo. 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 They call him Scooby-Doo. They call show Scooby-Doo. But Scooby doesn't do anything. Scooby is not involved. Half the time Scooby's not even involved. He's just a bystander. It's one of the worst deals we've ever had. To call a show Scooby-Doo and then not deliver on Scooby-Doo. This is not a show about a dog sniffing its ass, okay? This is your show of where the mystery team are in a van and they walk around and they do, they figure out, mystery. They're solving mystery. And Scooby is not involved in any way, shape, form. Scooby, frankly, gets much, too much attention, money. We're giving way too much attention to Mr. Scooby. And he's not doing anything. Scooby-Doo, he doesn't do. So we call him Scooby, but he doesn't do. We call him Scooby, but he doesn't do. It's a terrible deal. The show, by the way, if we were talking about who actually was doing anything, solving mystery and helping crime, stopping the bad guys who are really not so bad. If you talk to some of these guys, they just want to remake the world into a better place if it wasn't for these meddlesome kids and their stupid dog. Okay? But we're doing a show about mystery team. They're solving the mystery. They should call the show Velma. Why don't they call the show Velma? Velma's the one doing everything. Fred and Daphne, they're just over there porking in the corner. They're not doing anything. They're making out being unhelpful, okay? Fred just drives. Fred's just the driver. He doesn't drive the plot, and he doesn't drive the mystery, and he doesn't solve the mystery. He just moves the van from place to place, A to B. And it's a very unhelpful thing. We don't even need the van. The van does not play narrative. It does not have narrative role, okay? Other than we can't be doing the same crime in the same place. We need to move on to a new monster. And so from that perspective, Van makes a lot of sense. But Daphne, not much to do. Daphne, very not much to do. Shaggy, oddly enough, this little stoner who's over in the corner picking his ass and rolling joints, weirdly actually ends up helping the mystery a lot more than Fred than Daphne. Okay, a lot more. And yet we call show Scooby-Doo. We call the show Scooby-Doo, and we should be calling it Velma. We should be calling it Shaggy and Velma, with minimal help from Scooby-Doo. And we're doing a terrible job, frankly, monitoring this situation. People say I know haunted diver, haunted scuba guy. Of course I wish him well. I wish anybody well. He glows, and he's got glowing seaweed and glowing kelp on his body. I wish a lot of people well, okay? I would wish Jab.